So, hello everyone. For those of you who don't recognize me, my name is Kashette Roman. I am a reference librarian and the head of adult programming at the Irvington Public Library. Today we have Quell Nessuno, who's going to be presenting Rudderless, Navigating the World as an Autistic Person. We're trying something new with today's presentation. We're using an auto-transcribing feature on Zoom to pick up on the audio and hopefully translate it into legible captions. If you experience any issues with this feature, please let us know. We'd love to see whether it's useful for future programs or not. Otherwise, if you have any comments or questions, we ask that you please leave them at the end of the presentation. We ask that you please do not unmute yourself until that time. This program is being recorded and will be made available on the Irvington Public Library's YouTube channel, social media, and website at a later date after we've confirmed that there are no issues with the video or audio. With that in mind, I am going to shut off my audio and video and hand things over to Quell. And here we go.
Thank you so much, Kashette, and thank you to the Irvington Public Library for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Before I do begin my presentation, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that because this is a broadcast from the Irvington Public Library, and I live in the Bronx, that we are performing this on Indigenous lands. We are in the region known before European settlement as Lenape-Hoking, home to the Munsee Lenape and Wappinger peoples, the Wet'quaskic band. I encourage everyone to think very deeply about the native lands that you occupy. And if you would like to find out more about the original peoples of the area in which you live, to visit native-land.ca. Anyways, I am Quell Nessuno. Before I started, I wanted to introduce myself to you all. I am a non-binary autistic person, and my pronouns are AM. I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, but I currently live in the Bronx. I am a self-taught software engineer, and I am passionate about invasive species management, as you all should be as well. Disclaimer: some of the topics discussed in this presentation may be triggering for fellow autistic people, particularly descriptions of institutional abuses wielded against us. As a point of reference, I am going to be using at several points the term allistic, which is a word that simply means not autistic. I would also like to take a minute to overview the differences between person-first and identity-first language. One of the most popular ways of referring to autistic people from outside of the community is the person-first language style, i.e., a person with autism. This is often dispreferred by autistic self-advocates because it distances us from the experience that is so critical to who we are, and that decoupling of our autism from our identities it often correlates with rhetoric of cures, that autism is something that could theoretically be separated from us. Many self-advocates prefer identity-first language, referring to autistic people, or even as a noun, autistics. It recognizes and respects that this is something intrinsic to who we are, that it is not a disease or something additional imposed upon us. With that all out of the way, let's jump into it. 1, what is autism? Autism is officially classified as a neurodevelopmental disability, a spectrum of related disability characteristics. It is a family of quote unquote disorders characterized by issues with sensory processing, motor control, language acquisition, emotional regulation, and so on. One of the most common external characteristics of autism are repetitive self-stimulus behaviors, stimming, such as flapping one's hands, rocking back and forth, body movements, verbal tics, etc., which are often used during periods of emotional distress, but are often also used as a calming and enjoyable sensory experience. Sensory processing issues are a very common experience among autistic people. Certain textures, bright lights, and loud noises, sensations can be much more intense and painful than for non-autistic people. Being easily overwhelmed by these stimuli can make day-to-day living difficult, especially in public spaces where light and noise and general stimuli are especially intense. When it comes to, when it comes to hobbies and interests, autistic people often develop very strong fixations, becoming very focused and immersed with what are called special interests. Because it is classified as a disorder, autism is seen as something in need of treatment, where the treatment often focuses on bringing the autistic individual to a state of normality where possible. Various tactics are employed, from special education to ABA, applied behavioral analysis, all with the goal of repairing or mitigating the autism itself. To differentiate between perceived severity of autism, so-called functioning labels are imposed upon us, separating high-functioning persons from low-functioning persons. There is overlap between these terms and the now outdated Aspergers Syndrome and severe autism, respectively. These labels are intended to indicate broadly the level of support an autistic person needs to function from day to day. But these labels are subjective and even reductive in nature. This is the official model of autism, the medical model, defined by doctors and psychiatrists and people whose lived experience is not the lived experience of autism. While many of the sensory and stimulus and many of the symptoms I described are indeed commonalities of the autistic experience, one of the big issues is defining these as the products of a disorder, of a defective state that needs to be either cured or managed. There are various issues with these things, with the way autism is discussed in the mainstream, which I will go over now. One of the biggest issues is the division of autism into the categories of high and low functioning, in particular as expressed via the term Asperger's Syndrome, which is often synonymous with high functioning. The man you see on the screen before you is Hans Asperger, an Austrian pediatrician and researcher of autism in the 1930s and 40s, for whom Asperger's Syndrome was named. He was also an active collaborator with the Nazi regime, particularly the Action T4 policy, which led to the euthanization of countless thousands of disabled people, whose lives were seen as a drain or burden on the German state. Asperger himself recommended that various of his child patients be sent to hospitals that were widely known as sites where disabled people were sent off to be killed. Functioning labels, which are little more than a practice of dividing autistic people based on our perceived burden to society, are a byproduct of the same social forces and ideology that gave rise to Action T4, where disabled people's lives are not seen as valuable. We are seen often as polluting the gene pool and draining the resources of normal society. This is quite obviously false. This is a horrible eugenicist view which does not respect our dignity or treat us as full human persons. An autistic person who cannot speak or walk, who may be labeled as low functioning, who may require 24/7 home care, is no less valuable than an autistic person who is able to live independently. Sorry about that. Another issue is the perception that autism is a childhood disorder, that autism exists solely in the realm of childhood, and all of the resources for autism are aimed not at autistic people ourselves, but at parents of autistic people. This is a very big issue because it is centering the people around us who are not autistic rather than centering our experiences, listening to our voices and respecting our needs. By the societal framing of autism as a childhood thing, it both encourages the prioritization of the feelings of parents, which is often correlated with control and management and many of the autonomy depriving acts and practices that are commonly inflicted upon autistic children, and it denies the support structures that autistic people will need as they become autistic adults. Because while some people may think otherwise, autism is a lifelong thing. It is a intrinsic neurodevelopmental difference, and it is important to recognize this so that at all stages of life, autistic people can have our dignity, we can have the support structures that we need to navigate through the world without overly prioritizing and giving deference to the quote unquote needs of parents. Finally, rather than as a disorder, autism should be thought of as a diverse spectrum of related experiences and symptoms, with overlaps in the aforementioned social, physical, and emotional domains, among others. By refusing to define autism in pathologizing terminology, we can instead view it as one of the many configurations that a human person can exist in on this planet. Before we continue, I do want to keep this fairly conversational. If anyone had any questions, or are there any questions in the chat, I would like to take a moment to address them, but it doesn't look like there are. So let's continue. Oh, sorry, my fingers are, I'm having poor motor control today. I apologize. While it is true that conceiving of autism as a disorder is pathologizing, autistic people do experience a range of difficulties. But rather than being a result of an innate defect, though, the problem lies in the environment that autistics exist in. It's important to first understand the social model of disability. This is a model which states that the root of disability is not in the characteristics of the disabled person, but it is in the fact that the society in which the disabled person exists in is not accessible. It is not built to accommodate the differences. It is built for one type of person only. Through the social model of disability, we say that autism is a disability, not because there is anything wrong with us, but because society disables us. Society refuses to treat us and grant us the things we need to thrive. it's a question of lack of accessibility versus a flaw. I would give an example. Imagine that you get a job, and at this job, even though it is unrelated to the tasks you will be performing at the job, you are required to wear a 60-pound backpack, a 60-pound weighted backpack. It has nothing to do with your tasks. It has nothing to do with anything. It is just a requirement. Day after day, hour after hour working, whether you are doing construction or you're even just sitting down at an office job, wearing that 60 pounds, that imposition, would make performing your job a lot harder. It would make it very difficult to function. And this wouldn't be because you are a physically weak person. Even a physically fit person would experience difficulties having this imposition upon them. Another example I would give is in the realm of epileptic people and the prevalence of strobing lights. There are so many sources of strobing and rapidly flashing light that simply don't need to exist, whether it be from outdoor signs or tail lights on cars, that when the car brakes, the tail light rapidly flashes, even rapidly strobing ambulance lights. These are not necessary to perform the function of an ambulance, but yet this is the state of the society that we live in. Epileptics, beyond seizures and other symptoms, are disabled by the societal refusal to make the changes that would make it easier to be an epileptic person in our society. So, with that in mind, we get to the core of this presentation. This is called Rudderless, Navigating the World as an Autistic Person. So let's talk about rudders. Here is a rudder. Here is a boat with a rudder. Ships are built with rudders. Rudders help steer and guide the ship through the water. They, I don't think I can describe it in mechanical terms, but it helps the boat to turn and stay on the course and change course when necessary. Without a rudder, it will be much harder to navigate the ship. It will be much harder to steer and exist in the environment of the ocean or body of water that you are trying to get through. I propose that to be autistic is to be rudderless. There are so many differences of communication between autistic and non-autistic people. Many autistic people find very literal, metaphor-free styles of communication to be the easiest to understand, or sometimes the only style of communication that we can understand. Many allistic people, many non-autistic people, speak in metaphors and rely on assumed knowledge or implicit social rules and implicit social cues, such as facial expressions and body language, which are something that many of us struggle with. Like I said about social rules and assumptions, there are so many implicit social rules that people are expected to absorb through cultural osmosis. There are so many things that are not explicitly taught, that you are not explicitly socialized on, but that you are expected to adhere to. So many little cues, so many little behaviors, whether it be table manners all the way to how it's appropriate to converse with a superior at work. Many people pick up on these and are able to operate in these implicit social scenarios. But for many autistic people, this is very difficult. Many of us find that if the social rules are not explicitly laid out, then we don't have a map of how to navigate these scenarios. There are so many behavioral expectations. For example, the common experience of stimming, of flapping one's hands or rocking back and forth, does not hurt anyone, but it is perceived as weird or disruptive or obnoxious when there is nothing harmful or inherently obnoxious about it. Nevertheless, autistic people are expected to curb some of our innocuous behaviors simply because it's not done in wider society, simply because that's not what is socially acceptable. And these experiences combined, this combination of differences between autistic and allistic styles of thinking about the world and looking at the world, and going back to earlier in the presentation, things like ABA, things like special education and institutionalization, coupled with a allistic society which refuses to be accommodating to our differences, it leaves me feeling like I don't have a rudder. I often feel like I have to keep meticulous notes and learn and memorize everything through rote and develop social scripts just to get through scenarios. That idea of scripts, of well-defined plans and contingency scenarios and strategies for getting through social scenarios is something that many autistic people also experience. But wait, Quell, you might say, you're trying to tell us that autism isn't a defect, but at the same time, you are comparing yourself to a ship or a boat that lacks a rudder. Doesn't that mean that you are saying that you have some sort of inherent defect or that you do lack something? I would say, well, think about this. Ships do not emerge fully formed. They are made. Someone puts a rudder on a ship. Someone builds a ship with a rudder or not. It is a decision shaped by the social context in which the builder of the vehicle exists. This is the inaccessibility of society. Society, in general, the patriarchal, heteronormative society, the very racist society that we live in, refuses to accept many of the differences and the diverse spectrum of human experience, instead building a society for one kind of person. In the US, in Europe, the assumed default human is a white cisgender man. And the ideology that drives this leads society to be hostile to people who fall outside of this model. It's something that happens to many different types of people, but autistic and other neurodivergent and disabled people, for certain. One of the bigger issues is that because there is this refusal to accept, because society is not built for other kinds of people, there is so much institutional violence, particularly against Black autistic people. This is something that in this day and age, combined with the threat of police violence, many Black autistic people are at a much, much higher risk for violence than white autistic people. Autistic people in general are subjected to isolation and restraint tactics. In some cases, literally being strapped down to chairs or restrained against the floor because the school institutions or other institutions as they may be, their purpose is not to provide guidance. Their purpose is not really, their stated purpose might be, but their true purpose is not to provide guidance and support to autistic people, but rather to manage us, like I said, to either try and bring us to a state of normality, if possible, and if not, to keep us away from the nice, polite society. Hand in hand with these kinds of institutional violence is psychiatric violence. Psychiatry is a very violent institution, one that has very racist origins, and autistic people, like other disabled people, are subject to it as well. Being forced on medications to make us more normal, being institutionalized in psychiatric facilities, oftentimes for outlandish things that would be no big deal if a non-autistic person had done them. Another source of institutional violence is ABA, applied behavioral analysis, where in practice, autistic children are trained almost like animals from a very young age to behave in the correct and appropriate way, often using methods that really do seem like training a dog, using treats and food as motivation, using spray bottles in autistic children's faces. It's very horrific, but it's part and parcel with the institutional treatment of autistic people as a whole. We have proven and we have demonstrated that society is very hostile and inaccessible to autistic people in general. So, as a logical next step, what should we do about it? One of the things that we can do is evaluate how we think about the different and bizarre and weird behavior of other people, really evaluating whether these things deserve any derision or scorn, or whether our attitudes towards them are a result of existing in this hostile society, which socializes us all to have certain outlooks towards disabled and neurodivergent people. It is important to celebrate neurodiversity, to recognize that the spectrum of human brains and human behaviors and human personalities is infinite and pardon me, is infinite and varied. Another thing that we all need to do is to commit to accessibility. We are using the auto captioning service for this Zoom meeting because one thing that many autistic people have is auditory processing disorder. I myself have this, and I find it much more accessible to read a transcript or read captions than try to decipher speech using my ears. Whenever possible, we should use technologies and build events in ways that are accessible to the greatest number of people as possible. We should think about things like, will there be strobing or flashing lights at my event? Is there going to be too much noise? Thinking about people with light sensitivities, even from the biggest things to the smallest things. We need to be thinking about how we can change the structures that exist to be more accessible to everyone. It is often hard work, and it can feel like a value judgment against us, but ultimately, it makes society better for everyone. It might be obnoxious in the short term to build a wheelchair ramp into your place of business, but in the long run, committing to these practices will vastly improve society. Additionally, we all need to speak out against the institutional violence that particularly autistic people of color, experience. We need to all be doing more, whether it be attending local government or writing letters or petitions or protesting or picketing, to be protesting and opposing the institutional violence that is wielded against us. One example of this is special education. One thing that is often very true is that special education is a form of segregation. It does not achieve its stated goals of providing a unique environment in which people with quote unquote special needs can be educated, but rather to separate and keep disabled people from their non-disabled peers. Mainstreaming, or the practice of having classrooms that include disabled and non-disabled, autistic and non-autistic students, is something that we should all be supporting. There are many treatment facilities, such as the Judge Rotenberg Center, where children who are deemed to be of particular severity are sent. In practice, these are institutional child torture centers where things like electric shocks are applied to children's skins, all with the goal of eliminating that which makes us different. The Judge Rotenberg Center is not the only example of this. There are many such facilities all over the country, and it is right that if we are truly committing to accessibility and justice, that we should demand that these things be shut down. We should also oppose, wherever possible, applied behavioral analysis, because autistic children are not animals in need of training. We are human beings. Advocates of ABA may state that there are inclusive and accessible ways of doing this, that it is just about social skills or providing the resources that autistic children lack so that they can more easily interface with their peers. This is a deflection tactic, and ABA that is provided and imposed upon autistic children is not something we should support writ large. One thing I forgot to add onto this slide that I would like to add is that we should be opposing organizations like Autism Speaks, which take away from autistic voices and deny us our agency and push towards a mythical cure. And we should be supporting organizations like ASAN, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, instead. One of the slogans that arose from the autistic self-advocacy community is "nothing about us without us." And I think that really puts a nice little bow, or as you may see on your screen, a rainbow infinity symbol on the package that I have tried to present to you today. Nothing about us without us. We need to be fully included in an accessible society so that our voices may be heard and that rather than depriving us of the rudders that we so desperately look for to navigate a hostile society, that rather than pining for something to help us navigate through this hostile context, that we eliminate the hostile context altogether, and that accessibility is extended to everyone. That concludes my presentation. It was relatively short, but I hope a good overview and call to action for how we can together make the world a more accessible place. If there are any questions, this would be the time to ask them.
Okay, thank you so much, Quell. If anyone does have a question and they want to communicate it via text, feel free to use the chat box by clicking on the button at the bottom of your screen that is shaped like a cartoon speech bubble. If anyone wants to ask a question via audio, they can hold down the space bar on their keyboard. If you want to ask a question and you don't want it included in the final recording, please feel free to let us know. We'll make sure to edit that segment out after the fact, and we will not put the recording up until we're sure that it's been removed. We'll allow a minute or two in case anyone does have any questions to ready them. Okay, we're not seeing anything via audio or in the chat box. So in that case, I'm going to go ahead and start recording and say thank you once again to Quell and all our audience members. We'll allow a moment after the recording ends for any other questions or comments to filter in, but that's it for the recording. Thanks again.
Thank you.